Hello everyone tonight. We are sharing a collection of chilling accounts sent in by you, my incredible listeners. We begin with a terrifying saga from a young man who, through no fault of his own, moved into a house steeped in a dark and powerful history, a home that once belonged to a formidable sorcerer. What he encountered there was merely the first chapter in a long and harrowing journey into a world he never knew existed. A world of vengeful spirits and inescapable dark magic. This is a chilling tale sent to me by a listener named Liam, who lives in a quiet, forgotten corner of Louisiana. He wanted me to share his terrifying experience with all of you, to serve as a warning. His story begins around 2009. The air in Louisiana that year was thick and heavy, clinging to the skin like a damp shroud. His family, looking for a new start, bought an old house in a small, rural town, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, and every house has a story. The one they bought had more than a story. It had a reputation, a legend that the locals only spoke of in hushed, nervous whispers. It was previously owned by a man known throughout the region, not just as a healer, but as a formidable practitioner of folk magic, a root doctor whose power was said to be absolute. They said he could weave charms that brought fortunes and craft curses that brought ruin with equal skill. After he passed from this world, his family, eager to be rid of the property and its lingering energies, sold the house. It changed hands twice, each family staying only a short time before leaving abruptly, before Liam's family became its third and most recent owners. You might think that living in a normal house can be scary enough if there's a spirit attached to it, but living in the home of a sorcerer, well, that is an entirely different level of fear. A fear that seeps into the very foundations of your reality. In the beginning, a deceptive quiet settled over the house. A heavy, watchful silence. Liam's family members all had jobs that took them away during the day, leaving him and his mother alone in the echoing rooms. It was during this period of quiet solitude that the veil between worlds, already thin in that place, began to tear. One afternoon, seeking refuge from the oppressive midday heat, Liam lay down for a nap. He drifted off and found himself in a dream so vivid, so hyper-realistic, that it felt more real than his waking life. In this dream, the front door of his house, which he knew was locked, swung open without a sound. Two spectral figures walked directly inside. They were dressed like soldiers from a long-forgotten war, their forms shimmering with a faint, ethereal light, like heat haze rising from summer asphalt. One was clad in armor of brilliant, blinding gold. The other in armor of cold, polished silver. They were knights from some ancient, ghostly war. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that these were what the old sorcerer would have called his spirit soldiers, his ethereal guardians, bound to the property even after their master was gone. But they were not alone. Between them, they led a creature on a spectral leash, a dog whose form was a twisted mockery of nature. Its face was not the gentle face of a canine. It was a demonic, snarling visage. Its lips peeled back to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Its eyes burned with a malevolent red glow. Two smoldering coals set in the abyssal darkness of the dream. And this abomination did not walk on the ground. It floated, weightless and sinister, drifting effortlessly over his family's fence as if gravity had no claim on its unholy form. The sky in his dream was a suffocating, pitch-black void, yet the dog's fiery eyes seemed to bore directly into his searing an image of pure, undiluted terror directly onto his soul. Liam jolted awake, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. His sheets were soaked with sweat. The dream was gone, but the fear lingered like a foul taste in his mouth. The image of those burning red eyes imprinted on the back of his eyelids. After what felt like an eternity, his bone-deep exhaustion won out, and he drifted back into an uneasy sleep. But just 5 minutes later, the nightmare returned. It was not a continuation. It was a replay, identical in every horrifying detail. The two spirit soldiers, their silent, inexorable procession, the demonic hound, its red eyes finding him even in the darkness. This time, when he woke up, sleep was an impossibility. The terror was too real, too close. A suffocating presence in the room with him. He stayed awake for the rest of the night, every shadow thrown by the moonlight looking like a looming threat, every creak of the old house sounding like a ghostly footstep. The next night, it happened again. The same dream. The same spectral soldiers leading their demonic hound. But this time, there was a change. The hound didn't just enter the yard. It began to circle the house, relentlessly, its glowing red eyes always fixed on the walls, on his window, on Time's him. It was hunting! Again! Liam forced himself to stay awake, his nerves frayed raw, his mind teetering on the edge of panic. For 3 consecutive nights, this terrifying vision tormented him, a relentless, targeted, spiritual assault. On the 3rd night, the encounter escalated. It breached the fragile barrier of his dreams and spilled into the physical world. He was sleeping, exhausted and vulnerable, when he suddenly woke around 1 in the morning. A wave of absolute dread washed over him. Cold and paralyzing, he saw them again. The 2 armored spirits and their hound, standing just outside his bedroom door. But this time, they were not a vision in his mind. He was caught in that terrifying state between waking and sleeping. His body paralyzed, but his mind screamingly aware. He saw the demonic dog lower its head, its muscles coiling, and lunge at him. Its spectral jaws snapped, tearing at him with a viciousness that felt terrifyingly, physically real. He felt the phantom pain of its teeth on his skin. His instincts roared to life, screaming at him to fight back. Near his bed was an old fireplace. He fumbled in the dark, his fingers searching desperately for a heavy piece of firewood he'd seen there earlier. The moment his fingers closed around the rough, splintered wood, just as he was about to swing at the monstrous dog, he felt an immense force grab him. The 2 spirit soldiers had him. Their grip was like iron, colder than ice, and they were pulling at him, trying to drag him out of his bed, out of his room. With an unnatural, irresistible strength, a desperate, primal struggle began. He was kicking and thrashing wildly, fighting for his life against the icy grip of these entities. In his frantic defense, his foot slammed into his home stereo system. The heavy amplifier and subwoofer toppled from their shelf, crashing to the floor with a thunderous, reverberating boom that shook the entire room. The sudden, loud noise shattered the paranormal spell like a pane of glass. Liam's eyes flew open. He was tangled in his sheets, his body trembling uncontrollably, drenched in a cold sweat. The spirits were gone. He was truly, finally awake, but the fear was now deeply rooted in his heart, a seed of terror that would follow him for the rest of his life. Why was he seeing the exact same thing for 3 nights in a row? What did they want from him? He finally told his mother everything. his voice shaking as he recounted the spectral soldiers and their demonic hound. She, too, was deeply unsettled. She didn't understand who these entities were or why they were tormenting her son, but she knew they did not belong there. She decided to perform a cleansing ritual. She prepared a small offering of food and incense and walked through the entire house, her voice a low, steady murmur as she said prayers for peace, for passage, for release. Miraculously, after that, the spirit soldiers and their demonic hound never returned. Liam believes they were the former master's guardians, left directionless and confused after his death, wandering the property in a state of perpetual duty until his mother's heartfelt prayers finally guided them away, into the light. A while later, life seemed to return to normal. Liam moved to the bustling, vibrant city of New Orleans for a job, working for his half-brother. The city hummed with a different kind of energy, a mix of life and history, of music and ghosts. He slept in a small, secondary building on his brother's property. His room was at the front, a simple, functional space. Behind it was a larger, completely empty storage room, filled with nothing but dust and shadows. For the first few months, everything was peaceful. The city was loud. His job was demanding, and his nights were blessedly dreamless. But the quiet he was coming to learn was not meant to last. One night, after working a grueling late shift, he came back utterly exhausted, his body aching, his mind numb. He fell straight into bed, not even bothering to change his clothes. As he lay there, drifting in the grey twilight between consciousness and sleep, he saw them, two ghostly white shadows. They moved with a slow, deliberate grace, emerging from the empty back room, passing directly through the solid wall as if it were made of smoke, and entering his own room. He watched, frozen in a state of pure, primal horror, as they climbed onto his mattress. Liam would later say that no matter how deeply you're sleeping, you always feel it when someone else gets on your bed. He felt the distinct, undeniable sensation of the mattress dipping under their weight. A clear, physical pressure that screamed at him, "This is not a dream." Terrified, he leaped out of bed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He cautiously made his way into the empty back room, every nerve ending on fire, expecting to find something, there. But it was completely empty, just as it always was. A cavern of silent, dusty darkness. He told his brother what happened, his voice still choked with fear. But his brother just brushed it off with a wave of his hand. "There are no ghosts at my workplace," he said, his tone dismissive. "You're just tired and imagining things." The dismissal didn't matter. The fear was real. The weight on the mattress was real. The very next day, Liam packed his things. He couldn't spend another night in that room, knowing what shared his space when he slept. He moved into a small rental apartment, hoping to leave the shadows behind. Unfortunately, it seemed his troubles were not tied to a place. They were tied to him. The new apartment he rented was in a gloomy, oppressive-looking building that seemed to sag under the weight of its own misery. Around this time, he brought his young son to live with him. A bright spark of joy in his increasingly shadowed life. But from the very first day they moved in, his son's behavior changed dramatically. Every single morning, like a cursed clock, at precisely 4 a.m., the child would wake up screaming. Not the normal cry of a child waking from a bad dream, but a shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. He would cry inconsolably, his little body trembling with a fear Liam couldn't understand and couldn't soothe. The only thing that would calm him was being carried outside, into the pre-dawn air. The moment they stepped back into the apartment, the terrified wails would start again. This happened every single day. A horrifying, heartbreaking ritual. Seeing his son in such distress was an agony beyond words. Liam knew, with a father's certainty, that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with that place. He made the difficult, soul-crushing decision to send his son back to his parents in the countryside, where he would be safe from whatever unseen thing haunted that apartment. Now living alone, Liam continued his grim routine. Work during the day, dread the night. He always slept with the lights off, having once found comfort in the total darkness. Now, the darkness felt like a living thing. A few nights after his son left, he was lying in bed, staring into the blackness. When he saw it, in the far corner of his room stood the small, shimmering figure of a child. It was a ghostly apparition, translucent and wavering, like a reflection on disturbed water. As he watched, paralyzed by a new and profound terror, the child then crouched down. It began to make soft, lapping motions with its head, as if it were drinking water from the bare floor. The sight was so disturbing, so utterly unnatural, that a wave of pure revulsion and fear washed over him. He kicked open his bedroom door and fled, not even stopping to put on shoes. Running to his neighbor's apartment, a woman he was friendly with, and begged to sleep on her couch. His words tumbling out in a panicked, incoherent stream. When he finally calmed down enough to tell her what he had seen, her face went deathly pale. That explains it, she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. My own daughter is terrified of that corner. She points to that exact spot in her room and just cries and cries. She won't go near it. Their apartments were side by side, separated only by a thin plasterboard wall. The corner in his room was the exact same corner in her daughter's room. The next day, desperate, Liam went to the market and bought offerings, ripe fruit, and fragrant incense, and performed a small, simple ritual for the child spirit. He prayed for its peace. That night, he hoped his act of kindness would bring him some respite. Instead, as he lay in bed, his eyes locked on the corner, he saw the child again, standing in the very same spot. He was terrified, but tried to remain calm. To project peace, he decided he would simply get up and go back to his neighbors. He wouldn't disturb it. But as he prepared to sit up, the ghost child moved. It was no longer in the corner. In the blink of an eye, it was on top of him, sitting on his chest. An immense, crushing weight pressed down, stealing the air from his lungs, paralyzing him completely. He was pinned to the bed, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to scream. In the frantic, silent darkness of his mind, he began desperately reciting Buddhist prayers, repeating the mantras over and over, his only weapon against the suffocating horror. After what felt like an eternity, an endless moment of pure terror, the pressure lifted. The child's presence vanished. Shaken to his very core, he immediately called his father, who went to a local temple and received blessed talismans from a venerated monk. From the moment Liam placed those sacred papers in his room, the oppressive, cold atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of warmth and profound peace. He never saw the ghost child again. at his job. Liam worked with a transgender woman named Chloe, who was known throughout their community to be a gifted and powerful medium. Spirits were often drawn to her, and she would sometimes allow them to speak through her, to channel their messages from the other side. There was one spirit in particular, a grumpy old man, who would possess her from time to time, speaking through her in a gruff voice, demanding cigarettes from the living. One evening, the company treated the employees to a large dinner. It was a rare chance for everyone to relax and socialize. Knowing about Chloe's abilities and desperate for answers, Liam approached her. He asked if she could help him understand the paranormal events that had plagued his life, that had followed him like a shadow. She looked at him with knowing eyes and agreed to give him a reading. What she told him sent a chill of recognition down his spine. She described, with perfect, impossible accuracy, every single entity he had ever encountered: the two spirit soldiers in their gold and silver armor, the demonic hound, the two white shadows that had climbed onto his bed, the weeping ghost child in the corner. She even knew details he hadn't told another living soul. Then she added something new, something that explained the apartment. The owner of your apartment building is a devout Catholic, she said, her voice low. Because of his faith, he doesn't believe in ghosts or spirits, so he never has the property cleansed or blessed. The spirits there are trapped, and they are lonely. Then she looked at him intently, her gaze seeming to pierce right through him. You have the aura of a warrior, she said, her words echoing in the noisy restaurant. Your spirit is like a beacon in the dark, a lighthouse in a storm. And that's why the unseen are so drawn to you. When they see you, they don't just see a man. They see a light. They notice you. They mark you. He didn't fully understand what she meant, but the words resonated with a deep, unsettling, and undeniable truth. Liam also had a strange quirk. Normally, he was sensitive to spirits, a low hum of awareness just beneath the surface of his reality. But after a few drinks, his sensitivity skyrocketed. That night, after the dinner, well into the evening, he went to the back kitchen to wash some dishes. As he stood at the sink, the warm water running over his hands, he looked up and saw that the room was filled with ghosts. They were just standing there, silent and watchful. He saw an old woman, her face a roadmap of ancient wrinkles. He saw a younger woman with an expression of profound, eternal sorrow, holding the hand of a little girl whose eyes were wide and lost. Their clothes were all out of date, like old-fashioned dresses and formal suits from the early 20th century. It was as if the alcohol had temporarily, and terrifyingly, opened his third eye. The next morning at work, a colleague who worked the early shift confirmed his vision. She told everyone, her voice trembling, that at midnight, she had clearly seen the ghost of an elderly woman, about 80 years old, and a young girl of about 12, standing right in the main office, watching her work. Sometime later, a tragedy struck the company. The father of the company's owner passed away. Liam had always been close with the owner and his wife, affectionately calling them Grandpa and Grandma Henderson. But he had never actually met the owner's recently deceased father. He attended the wake, a somber affair that stretched late into the night. He stayed, sharing drinks and stories with his colleagues to honor the deceased. It was sometime in the deep, silent hours between 2 and 3 in the morning when he happened to glance up at the second-floor landing of the house. And there he was, a faint, translucent figure of an old man, standing there and looking down at the mourners below. Liam knew instantly he was seeing a ghost. I just saw Grandpa Henderson," he quietly told the people at his table. "The owner's wife, Mrs. Henderson, overheard him and scolded him gently, her face etched with grief. Don't be ridiculous. Liam, you're just drunk." But Liam insisted. The image burned into his mind. "No, I saw him so clearly," he said. He began to describe the spirit's appearance in minute, specific detail. He was wearing shorts, the kind made of that parachute-like material, and there was a little logo on them, a silhouette of a person holding a ball. They were the kind of shorts old men used to wear all the time. His shirt was a striped polo, and his hair was a buzz cut, but a little grown out. Not super short. He looked very thin, not heavy at all. I don't know if that was really him, but that's what I saw. As he spoke, a profound hush fell over the family members who were listening. They all stared at him, their eyes wide with disbelief and awe. Liam had never met the man, yet his description was perfect, down to the last detail. "That's right," one of them whispered, their voice cracking with emotion. "That's exactly what he was wearing before he passed away. And his hair, it was just like that. Mrs. Grain." Henderson was still skeptical. Her grief, making it hard to believe. She wondered if her husband's spirit was still at the hospital where he had died, or if it had truly come home. But Liam added one more, final detail. His face, he looked so incredibly sad. He was just standing there, with his head hanging down, looking completely, utterly heartbroken. A month later, they all understood why. Grandma Henderson, the owner's mother and the deceased's beloved wife, passed away peacefully in her sleep. Liam realized then that the old man's ghost hadn't been sad for himself. He was sad because he was waiting to take his beloved wife with him on their final journey together. Our next story comes from a listener named Olivia, and it takes place in a massive, sprawling shoe factory in a grim industrial town just outside of Detroit, Michigan. This happened back in 2019. Having just graduated from high school, full of hope for the future, Olivia took a job on the production line. The hours were brutal. A soul-crushing grind from 7 inches the morning until 9 at night. A relentless daily cycle of noise and repetitive motion. For the first few months, everything was normal, or as normal as such a life could be. But around the 4th or 5th month, as the seasons began to turn, the factory began to reveal its haunted, secret history. One afternoon, while standing at her station on the assembly line, her mind numb with fatigue, Olivia happened to glance up at the large window of the manager's office on the floor above. Her manager was a man from China who had poured his life savings into opening the factory, but he wasn't in the office. Through the window, she saw the distinct figure of a woman, dressed entirely in a striking, blood-red dress. The woman was standing perfectly still, her form a stark slash of crimson against the grey, industrial backdrop, looking down directly at her. At first, Olivia dismissed it. She figured the long hours and monotonous work were making her eyes play tricks on her. She shook her head, blinked hard, and got back to work, the image quickly fading. A few days later, however, something happened that was impossible to ignore. A man named Mason, who worked on the line with her, suddenly went berserk. One moment he was working normally, his movements practiced and efficient, and the next, he began grabbing tools and materials from the conveyor belt, heavy wrenches. sharp cutting implements, raw leather, and hurling them across the room with terrifying force. He let out a series of horrifying, guttural screams, his body convulsing as if charged with electricity. "I am so hungry! I am so cold!" A voice that was not his own, a voice ancient and full of despair, rasped from his throat. He became incredibly, inhumanly violent and aggressive. Several strong men from the factory floor rushed to restrain him, but he threw them off with an unnatural strength they couldn't possibly overcome. An older woman, a foreman who had worked at the factory for decades and had seen this before, quickly lit some incense, its fragrant smoke a stark contrast to the chemical smell of the factory, and began chanting prayers over him in a low, urgent tone. After a few tense, terrifying moments, Mason's body went limp, and he collapsed to the concrete floor. He slowly returned to his normal self, his eyes blinking in confusion, with absolutely no memory of what had just happened. From that day on, it became an unspoken, solemn rule. An incident like this was a sign, a demand from the other side. The senior supervisor in their department would have to go out and buy offerings of fruit and food and hold a small, quiet ceremony to appease the restless spirits of the factory. It was a strange, almost feudal tradition, but it seemed to work. In the months when the offerings were made, production was smooth, machines ran perfectly, and targets were always met. But if a month went by and the spirits were forgotten, something would inevitably go wrong. A critical machine would break down in a spectacular and costly fashion, or another worker would have a violent, terrifying episode. Then, the world changed. The COVID-19 pandemic hit. The company, desperate to keep production going, ordered a mandatory live-in lockdown. Olivia's team, a small, weary group of 20 people, was required to live at the factory. They all decided to set up their sleeping quarters on the second floor, as the ground floor was a disgusting, neglected space, infested with rats and roaches. The arrangement was grim, but bearable, except for one major problem. The only bathrooms were on the ground floor. At night, the entire ground level was plunged into a pitch-black, silent void, completely devoid of life and light. One night, Olivia woke up, the need to use the restroom undeniable. Terrified of going alone into that abyss, she woke up a friend, and the two of them crept downstairs. They were both deathly afraid of the dark, so they used their phone flashlights, the thin beams cutting sharp, nervous cones through the oppressive blackness. The ground floor was eerily silent. The massive, silent machinery casting long, distorted shadows that looked like crouching beasts. I was so scared, Olivia told me. I was reciting the Our Father under my breath with every single step. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, they heard a sound from the far end of the assembly line, a harsh, grating, scraping noise, like someone dragging a heavy metal chair across the rough concrete floor. Curious and terrified in equal measure, they stood at a distance and pointed their flashlight beams toward the source of the sound. What they saw made their blood run cold. A tall, completely white figure was moving towards them. It wasn't walking or running, it was gliding. A smooth, silent, horrifying motion, closing the distance with an unnatural, terrifying speed. They both screamed. A raw, primal sound of pure, undiluted terror that was swallowed by the factory's vast emptiness. They turned and fled, scrambling back up the stairs to the second floor. their hearts pounding so hard they felt they would burst from their chests. They ran so fast they were gasping for air, the color completely drained from their faces, their legs burning. When they burst back into the sleeping area, their screams had woken everyone up. They recounted their terrifying encounter to the rest of the group, their voices choked with sobs. One of the older workers, a man who had been with the company for over a decade, just listened calmly, a grim, humorless expression on his face. He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "You think that's time scary?" he said, shaking his head. "I've seen far worse in this place. You kids don't know the history. You don't know what you're sleeping on. This factory, it was built on top of an old graveyard." The revelation sent a wave of icy fear through the entire group. From then on, they slept with every single light on and played prayer recordings on a loop all night long, a fragile shield of sound and light against the encroaching darkness. For a couple of nights, things were quiet. But the peace was short-lived. A young woman on their team named Ava had the next experience. She told everyone she was lying in that hazy, vulnerable state between sleep and wakefulness when she heard a soft, whispering voice, seeming to come from right beside her ear. "Wake up, wake up. Come out and play with us. Come play." She thought it was strange. A dream, perhaps. Who would be asking her to play in the middle of the night? Groggily, she forced her heavy eyelids open and looked towards the large, grimy windows that faced the outside of the factory. There, she saw 3 shadowy figures. They looked young, maybe in their early 20s. They were outside, on the factory grounds, dancing and beckoning to her, their movements strange and jerky, hypnotic and wrong. A paralyzing fear seized her, locking her muscles, freezing the scream in her throat. All she could manage were small, choked, whimpering noises from the back of her throat as she thrashed silently in her sleeping bag. A prisoner in her own body. The man sleeping next to her felt the movement and heard her desperate, muffled cries. He shook her shoulder, calling her name. The moment he touched her, the spell was broken. Ava gasped, sitting bolt upright, her hair and clothes soaked in a cold, clammy sweat. The man who woke her gave her a stern, quiet warning, his eyes dark with the knowledge of that place. "From now on," he whispered, "if you hear someone calling your name at night, you keep your eyes shut tight. You ignore it. You pretend you hear nothing. Do you understand?" That night, no one on the second floor slept. For the rest of the brutal lockdown, one person after another experienced something terrifying, crushing sleep paralysis, disembodied whispers that called their names, fleeting shadows that danced at the edge of their vision. They endured it, their sanity fraying, until the lockdown was finally lifted. It seemed that every single person who had been forced to live in that factory left with a ghost story of their own, a permanent scar on their soul. As many of you have requested, I am now going to share 2 incredibly intense stories about black magic and the terrifying reality of curses. The first one comes from a young man named Daniel, who learned a terrifying lesson about lending money. His story is a chilling reminder to be careful, as you never, ever truly know who you're dealing with. Daniel is currently living and working in Houston, Texas, a sprawling, modern city with a large and diverse community of immigrants from all over the world. It was there that he met and started dating a young woman named Sophia, who was originally from the sun-drenched coast of central Vietnam. Sophia lived with her older sister, Isabella, who was from the more traditional north. Everything was going well. A normal, happy relationship. Until Daniel and Sophia decided they wanted to move in together. For reasons Daniel couldn't understand. Sophia's family was vehemently against it. And she, unwilling to defy them, eventually gave in to their pressure. Daniel suspected that Isabella was the one poisoning the relationship, constantly whispering things to her sister, turning her against him with subtle, venomous words. He felt that Isabella simply disliked him and was actively sabotaging their plans for a future together. Frustrated and hurt, he confronted Isabella at their apartment, which led to a massive, explosive argument. In the end, with Sophia unwilling to move out, the relationship fell apart and they broke up. Some time after the painful breakup, Daniel found himself in a tight spot financially. He remembered that back when he and Sophia were still together, Isabella had borrowed a significant sum of money from him. Promising to pay it back quickly, he contacted her to ask for it back. But Isabella ignored his requests, making a string of flimsy excuses or simply not responding at all. One day, on the first of the month, a day many cultures consider to be spiritually significant, a day of new beginnings, Daniel decided to try one last time. He knew in his gut she probably wouldn't pay, but he had to ask. As he predicted, she refused, and their text conversation quickly devolved from a simple request into a furious, bitter argument. That very night, everything changed. As Daniel prepared for bed, he felt a strange, heavy presence settle over his apartment. It was a suffocating feeling, as if the very air had thickened, as if the room was suddenly crowded with dozens of unseen people, all watching him. An inexplicable, irresistible force seemed to guide him, compelling him to walk out of his bedroom and into his living room, to sit on a tall bar stool he kept by the kitchen counter. The moment he sat down, a violent, invisible entity seized him. It grabbed his head with immense force and began slamming it, repeatedly and brutally, against the hard surface of the wall behind him. Bang, bang, bang. The sickening thud echoed in the silent apartment. He was completely powerless, a puppet in the hands of an unseen master, unable to fight back or even scream for help. Raised as a Buddhist, his deepest instincts took over. In the silent prison of his mind, he began desperately chanting prayers for protection. The sacred words, a frantic shield against the assault. After what felt like an eternity of this brutal, unseen violation, the presence suddenly, inexplicably, released him, shaking and terrified, his head throbbing with pain. He grabbed his phone and immediately placed a video call to a Buddhist master in Vietnam, a man who was not only a monk but also his spiritual guide. As soon as the master's face appeared on the screen, before Daniel could even speak a single word, the master said, "You've been cursed. That woman, Isabella, she has used black magic against you. Your prayers are the only reason you were able to break free. She meant to do you far greater harm." From that day on, Daniel cut off all contact with Isabella, blocking her number, erasing her from his life. But his ordeal was far from over. Months later, he learned that Isabella had started borrowing money from everyone at their shared workplace, accumulating a staggering debt of around $8,000. Having been burned by her before, Daniel felt a moral duty to warn his colleagues. He told them she was a fraud, a liar, that she had borrowed a large sum of money from him and had never paid it back. But his warnings had no effect. It was as if Isabella had cast a spell on the entire office. She could approach the most frugal, tight-fisted person. People who wouldn't spend a dime they didn't have to. And with just a few whispered words, they would willingly, eagerly hand over their money. It was unnatural, uncanny. Daniel later learned from his master that she was using dark magic, likely commanding spirit soldiers, the same kind of entities he had encountered in Louisiana, to influence people and take their money. Because she was using these dark entities, she was also aware of everything Daniel was doing. She knew he had sought help. She knew he knew what she was. When her debtors, emboldened by Daniel's warnings, finally started demanding their money back, calling her a liar and a cheat, she knew immediately that it was Daniel who had exposed her. Enraged, her dark secret revealed, she retaliated. This time, she didn't just want to scare him. This time, she commissioned a curse designed to kill him. But Daniel was no longer defenseless. After the first attack, he had begun his own intensive spiritual training under his master's guidance. The moment the new curse hit him, he felt it. A crushing, unbearable weight settled on his shoulders and neck. A constant, agonizing pressure, as if someone had chained invisible boulders to him. He knew he had to fight it. Because of his demanding work schedule, he had little time. So he would perform his own cleansing rituals every night. A grueling, exhausting process that lasted from 11 p.m. until 2 a.m. He felt he was in a constant, invisible war with Isabella's sorcerer, who would watch him spiritually and renew the assault the very moment he managed to cleanse himself. Each time the curse was reapplied, it felt stronger, more vicious, more malevolent than the last. The exhaustion was bone deep. He felt as if he was being physically beaten by 100 invisible assailants every single day. This spiritual war escalated. The third wave of the curse was so powerful it nearly broke him. He was left partially paralyzed, with a searing, white-hot pain in his spine that felt like a red-hot iron spike had been driven deep into his back. Even with his training, he couldn't fight this one alone. His master in Vietnam had to intervene directly. What followed was a battle fought on the spiritual plane, an unseen war between the master's benevolent spirits and the dark, malevolent entities commanded by Isabella's sorcerer. In the end, his master succeeded in breaking the curse, but it came at a great and terrible cost. He had to expend nearly all of his accumulated spiritual power. Daniel explained that in these kinds of magical battles, the losing sorcerer has their spirit army captured and absorbed by the winner, rendering them powerless, like a normal person. His master's spiritual forces were decimated, and he was left spiritually vulnerable. Even the winner, Isabella's sorcerer, would have suffered a great loss of their own life force, their own longevity, in the battle. And as for the one who commissioned the curse, Isabella, karma is inescapable. Whether she won or lost the spiritual battle, the curse would eventually reflect back upon her. Daniel noticed that after this silent, unseen confrontation, Isabella looked utterly drained. Her face was pale and gone, her eyes hollow, her energy completely depleted. He, on the other hand, dedicated himself even more fiercely to his spiritual studies, slowly, painstakingly building his own defenses. He could now repel minor curses on his own, but Isabella was relentless. Just last week, she found yet another, more powerful sorcerer to attack him again. This time, however, Daniel was strong enough to withstand the initial assault. Feeling only minor, familiar aches in his back and shoulders, he could now distinguish, with chilling certainty, between a normal physical ailment and the signature pain of a magical attack. Still, he knew he couldn't handle this new, more powerful threat alone, and once again asked his master for help. This time, the counterattack was swift and decisive. The curse was not only broken, but forcefully reflected back onto both Isabella and her new sorcerer with amplified force. The very next day at work, Daniel saw Isabella actively avoiding him. Her eyes, once filled with malice, were now filled with what looked like pure fear. To ensure his safety, his master sent powerful, benevolent spirits who had been training at his temple in Vietnam all the way to Houston to serve as Daniel's permanent, invisible guardians. People often ask Daniel why he doesn't use his own growing knowledge to curse Isabella in return. His answer is always simple. The principles of his faith strictly forbid harming others. He knows that the path of black magic always, inevitably, leads to ruin, and that those who walk it are destined for a terrible end, often dying tragic, violent, and lonely deaths. As a word of caution to all of us, he says that if you ever feel that you are the victim of a spiritual attack, you should pray. Go to a place of worship, or simply find a quiet space and pray with all the sincerity in your heart. Call out your name, state your intentions clearly, and ask for divine protection. Our final story tonight is a deeply unsettling account of a vacation gone horribly wrong. A stark and terrifying warning about meddling with spiritual artifacts in foreign lands. It was sent in by a listener named Noah. A few years ago, Noah and a group of 4 friends took a trip to Pattaya, Thailand, a trip of a lifetime, while they were on a tour bus. The air thick with the smell of diesel and exotic flowers. An older gentleman, a local guide, started telling them about a famous local temple. It was a place of great power, he said, where one could receive blessed amulets for good fortune and protection. Most of the group wasn't interested, content with the beaches and nightlife. But the oldest friend in the group, Michael, was intrigued and decided to go. Another friend almost went with him, but then remembered he already carried a protective bagua charm he'd gotten from a Buddhist temple back in the States. So he decided to stay behind. Michael went to the temple alone and returned later that day with his new amulet hanging around his neck. That night, Noah had a nightmare that was so vivid, so horrifying. It felt like a premonition, a glimpse into a terrible future. He dreamed he saw Michael being dragged away by a huge, seething crowd of shadowy figures. He could see Michael's back, and imprinted upon his skin, like a living tattoo, were countless writhing, tormented faces of people, their mouths open and silent. Eternal screams. Noah woke up in a cold sweat just before dawn. The horrifying image burned permanently into his mind. The next morning, his face pale, his voice shaking, he told the group about his dream. Everyone was deeply, profoundly spooked. They all urged Michael to get rid of the amulet immediately, convinced by their collective fear and Noah's terrifying, specific dream. Michael burned the amulet. They all watched as the flames consumed it, turning it to black ash. The rest of their vacation was fun and uneventful. They had faced the darkness, they thought, and won. But the horror was not in Thailand. The horror was waiting for them back home. A few days after their return, Noah received a frantic phone call. Michael had been rushed to the emergency room after suffering a series of violent, uncontrollable convulsions. The doctors were baffled. They told the family that in addition to treating severe internal injuries, he needed an urgent psychiatric evaluation. The reason was incomprehensible. A medical impossibility. Michael had swallowed dozens of metal nails. They showed the family the X-ray images. It was a grotesque, unbelievable sight. Nails were lodged in his esophagus and had even pierced his lungs. A large, tangled number of them were pooled in his stomach. When Michael was finally stable enough to speak, he told them a story that defied all logic, all reason. He said that a few days prior, while at work, he received a strange text message demanding that he immediately wire a large sum of money to a specific bank account. As he read the message, he felt an overwhelming, irresistible compulsion to obey. He said it was like his own will had been completely erased. His mind hijacked. He was about to process the transfer online when he realized he didn't have enough money in his account. Just then, a co-worker noticed his blank, a trance-like state, and shook him, asking if he was okay. The physical contact snapped him out of it, realizing he had almost been scammed. Michael got angry and texted back a string of insults to the mysterious number. That evening, he began to feel terribly ill. He had trouble breathing and developed a violent, racking cough that soon brought up flecks of blood. The next day at work, he felt a crushing headache and a strange sense of dissociation, of watching himself from a distance. But he tried to push through it. As he sat at his desk, he lost all control of his body. He began mumbling incoherently before his body was racked by the violent, terrifying seizure that landed him in the hospital. The final, chilling twist came when Noah went to Michael's house to pick up some personal items for him. As he was packing a bag in Michael's bedroom, his eyes fell upon a small object sitting on the dresser. It was the amulet from Thailand. It was sitting there, perfectly intact, gleaming in the lamplight, as if it had never been touched by fire. Noah described it as a red-colored charm, depicting a terrifying three-headed, six-armed deity, its faces contorted in rage, flanked by two lines of strange, reverse script that seemed to writhe before his eyes. These stories serve as a powerful reminder that there are forces in this world we do not, and perhaps cannot, understand. Whether you believe or not, it is always wise to be respectful and cautious, especially when traveling and encountering cultures and traditions different from our own. Some doors are not meant to be opened. Thank you for joining me for these chilling tales. Remember to like this video and subscribe for more stories from the shadows. Until next time, stay safe and good night.